Hey, book lovers. Want to hear a story? Welcome back to Storytime with Em. This is a mini episode from Em's Books and Cats podcast, where I am sharing my book, SuperGym, a chapter or sometimes two a week. And this week is a double chapter episode. We are doing chapters 17 and 18. As always, SuperGym contains adult content and might not be suitable for all listeners, so proceed with caution. So without further ado, please enjoy chapters 17 and 18 of SuperGym. Thor watched Maggie with a slight smile on his stern face. He had done it. Maggie had turned a corner. She was finally taking her training seriously. She worked hard in her classes and she was making progress. He looked forward to her weigh-in. It would be her first loss in months. Mr. Pratt would be pleased. The smile faded a little. Thor crossed his arms over his chest and barked another command. She must have heard something in his voice. It wavered ever so slightly. She raised her gaze to meet his. The unexpected eye contact startled him. No one ever looked directly at Thor. They didn't dare. She didn't fear him anymore. This was the end. Cracks were forming in his number one trainer persona. It was a mistake. He could never have what he really wanted. Mr. Pratt would not allow it. If he even got a hint of it, Thor would be demoted immediately to Fat Camp, the home to every failure in SuperGym history. It was the worst job in Famicili, and Thor's worst nightmare. He could not go to Fat Camp. Maggie plodded along on the treadmill. Her eyes stared blankly straight ahead. Her hair was wet with sweat and plastered to her neck. Her skin glistened. She was beautiful, and she would ruin him. Her stomach was shrinking. Her thighs were shrinking. Almost everything was getting smaller. She still had a soft, pillowy backside, but Thor was okay with that. He was secretly an ass man. Maggie had turned herself around. Her efforts had doubled, and she consistently logged her miles. She followed her restrictive diet, and there were no reports of her succumbing to a junkie's craving. Thor felt proud when he saw her loose, sagging skin. He was changing her life. The plan was working. The door flew open, and Mr. Pratt entered with a swagger. His skin was a strange shade of orangey brown. His white polo shirt made his face glow, and his smile was a crescent moon amidst his copper skin. A herd of dietitians and goons surrounded him. They moved silently and lined up against the wall. Mr. Pratt's laugh boomed as he clapped Thor on the back. "Thor, my boy, you truly are a miracle worker. Look at her go." His eyes burned holes into Maggie's backside. His face was lit with lecherous desire. Thor's hands clenched into fists, but he quickly released them as Mr. Pratt offered his hand. "I was beginning to think she was a hopeless case." He laughed again. "That's why you're my number one." He threw an arm around Thor's shoulders. "I think you deserve a bonus for this one, my boy. A big bonus. What do you want?" "Anything. You can have anything." Thor knew he shouldn't ask. He knew it was a dangerous request. He knew it would be the end of him. Then he opened his mouth, and the words came out anyway. Mr. Pratt's reaction was slow. He stood staring blankly at Thor with his mouth hanging open. His arms dropped to his sides. He struggled to process the request. When the realization came, his face slowly changed. His complexion went pale under his orange veneer. His keen eyes narrowed. Thor hadn't seen an expression that fierce since the early years, when Mr. Pratt was fighting for the city's health and well-being. The silence stretched on forever. Mr. Pratt cracked his knuckles. The sound was loud over the drone of treadmills. Thor took a small step back. One of the goons stepped forward, but Mr. Pratt raised his hand to stop him. His face had gone back to its original color. His body relaxed. He laughed, but his eyes were still angry. I'm afraid I can't do that, my boy. If it was anyone else, they'd be yours. What about Andy? Her proportions are almost perfect. Would you like her? No? Choose someone else. Anyone else. This one is different. She's special. And that makes her mine. He showed his teeth, but it wasn't really a smile. Anything else, my boy. Whatever you want is yours. Just not that. Thor swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, sir. Mr. Pratt nodded back. He walked over to Maggie and turned off the treadmill. He took her arm and guided her up the wide staircase to his office. This time, his posse did not follow. The dietitians kept their eyes glued to their tablets. The goons watched Thor. He wanted to kill Benjamin Pratt. He wanted to beat his mentor to a bloody pulp, take Maggie, and run. There was nowhere to run, but that didn't matter at the moment. Thor's fists pounded the cement walls until his hands ran red with blood. He couldn't feel anything. He raced across the room, but he hesitated with one sneaker on the bottom step of the massive staircase. The goons moved in close and surrounded him. Thor prepared for a fight. He knew instinctively who would be the first. The largest goon was standing close to him, but Thor was watching the red-bearded man on his left. The man jumped him a moment later, but Thor was prepared. He squatted down, got under the man, and threw him into a wall. The man's head made a sickening crack as it came in contact with the bricks. He fell in a crumpled heap onto a nearby treadmill and stayed there. Thor stood staring into the face of the largest goon. The others had fallen back and circled the body of their red-bearded cohort. The dietitians were scrambling for the door. The big goon stared back. He had a scarred, ugly face. The corner of his mouth twitched once. Twice. He spun around and shoved his way through the tangle of bodies by the door. The other goons quickly followed. Redbeard remained on the treadmill. His head was crumpled on one side, and blood spattered as the still-moving belt sprayed the surrounding machines. The clients on the other treadmills kept their eyes forward. They continued to run even as the blood drained from their cheeks and left their skin a pasty, greenish white. Thor took a long, deep breath and walked away from the gore. Someone else would clean up the mess. He flexed his fingers and made his body relax. He shut off his mind. It was a tactic he had mastered during grueling ultra-marathons, and it had saved him many times since. It was the only way he stayed sane after the final purge. His brother had been one of the final 3. He was an addict, a junkie, one of the first to join the HAAS, and one of the last to die. Quincy had always been too soft. Thor had begged him to follow his fitness plan. He offered to be his trainer, offered him an incredible family discount on his SuperGym membership. He even offered his diet plans for free, but Quincy refused everything he proposed. Their mother doted on Quincy and constantly gave in to his desires. She baked him sweets and pressed both boys to eat their fill. Only Thor had been able to resist. He watched with self-righteous disgust while his brother devoured the treats, barely chewing as the crumbs sprayed out over his shirt. The day Benjamin Pratt outlawed sugar was the first day Quincy tried junkies. Thor followed him all afternoon. When he ducked into a rundown bodega, Thor was not far behind. The store was empty except for the short, round man behind the counter, who glared suspiciously at Thor and wiped a smear of chocolate from his ample chins. Quincy had disappeared, and Thor retreated outside. His SuperGym uniform drew attention in that part of the city. Doors closed as he passed. Curtains drew back and abruptly fell again. He didn't see another living being, but he felt a dozen pairs of eyes following him. He ducked behind a dumpster that was overflowing with the now illegal sweets. The sugary smell was almost overpowering. It made Thor feel lightheaded and sick. He waited. Hours passed, but Quincy never emerged. Thor grew tired of waiting. The sky was growing dark. He had wasted an entire day following Quincy. He went back to the bodega and stood outside. The owner was watching him from his place near the register. He held something in his hands, but kept it down behind the counter. There was a small pink speck in his mustache. A sprinkle. Thor pointed to his own hairless upper lip and glared at the man. He knew he should confront him, but he was tired. His muscles had been inactive for far too long. He would report the man when he got back to the SuperGym. For now, he was just going to give him a little scare. He stalked around the building, intending to kick the back door in and scare the man out of his wits. Instead, he froze. His brother lay on a pile of wrappers. His stomach was bloated, his eyes were glazed, and he drooled crumbs from the corners of his mouth. Thor nudged him with his foot, and he groaned. He was still alive. After quite a bit of struggling, a shouting match with the owner of the bodega, and the use of a pulley system, Thor managed to get his brother's massive frame onto his back. He slowly staggered home. His mind was blank. Quincy's heavy bulk was just another weight. His goal was simply to move the weight. No thinking. Just action. The apartment was dark and cold. Their mother was gone. Nothing else was missing. She just vanished and never returned. They never knew what happened to her. Quincy thought she'd quit the SuperGym and gone into hiding. He thought she joined the Health at Any Size rebellion. Thor thought differently, but he didn't want to say it out loud. He hoped Quincy was wrong. He hoped he was wrong. Everything was just beginning, and Thor was still naive enough to think he could still save them. Their relationship was forever changed. Quincy openly defied the laws, and Thor struggled to uphold them. He fought alongside Mr. Pratt during the sugar riots, but when he came face to face with his own brother, he tried to protect him. He saved Quincy from the trainers. He hoped it would be enough. He hoped Quincy would finally see the error of his ways. But when Thor returned from the fray, his brother was gone. He hadn't seen him again until the final purge. The crowd was deafening. They were screaming for blood. Mr. Pratt pushed Thor in front of Quincy. He stood before his own brother with his arms crossed over his massive chest and watched impassively as Quincy was stripped of his flesh. Thor turned off his mind. Quincy's screams didn't reach him. The blood was something out of a terrible dream. Even now, he couldn't remember the details. Everything was vague and out of focus, except the knife and the hand that held it. Maggie's hand. Chapter 18. Maggie's life fell into a routine. She went dutifully to her workouts with Thor and gave in to him often enough to keep him satisfied. She followed her restrictive diet plan to the letter and stopped going to the cupboard for junkies. She was always home by curfew and in bed when the lights went out. That was her favorite part of the day. As she slid between the cool, scratchy sheets, she could feel the tension flow out of her aching body. After the lights went out, Trent would slip into her apartment and find his way to her through the darkness. It became a game. She would wait in the dark, and he would search for her. The anticipation was thrilling. Keeping Trent a secret was dangerous, but it was surprisingly easy. Maggie had Thor completely under her spell. The most terrifying SuperGym trainer had become obedient and eager to please. He was gentle with her now, and sex had become another boring routine. He wanted to make love and talk about their feelings. Maggie was surprised to find that she missed his cold, quiet stares. This new Thor was bland and uninteresting. Even his training had become predictable. Thor gave her more breaks, and he made her workouts easier on the days when Mr. Pratt wasn't prowling around the SuperGym. Benjamin Pratt was her only remaining problem. He was increasingly more obsessed with her progress. She was weighed and measured daily, and he used the time to examine her and note the places that needed the most work. One day he had Thor join in the fun. They took turns running their hands over her body and discussing her flaws. Then Mr. Pratt grabbed her and abused her while Thor watched. Thor was upset. He masked it well, but Maggie saw it in his eyes. A flash of rage, just a moment before his face became placid again. Mr. Pratt slapped her ass and laughed in his loud, booming way. "That's how it's done, my boy. If we ever find someone who meets your high expectations, I can give you some pointers. I do okay, sir. Mr. Pratt laughed again and slapped Thor on the back. Maggie saw Thor's jaw clench. I'll be the judge of that, my boy. I've got a new one for you to try. I don't want a juice bar dancer, sir. Not a dancer. She's a trainer. A newbie. Fresh meat. He licked his lips and squeezed Maggie's ass. Thor's hands tightened into fists, but Mr. Pratt wasn't looking at him. She's willing to do anything to get ahead. Anything, my boy. Think of the possibilities. I left her alone, though. She's yours for the taking. What do you say, my boy? Thor didn't answer. He wouldn't look at Maggie. She watched his face turn from red to purple. His rage was boiling over. His hands balled up at his sides again, and this time Mr. Pratt noticed. He abused Maggie again, but this time his eyes never left Thor's face. He finished, smiled at Thor, and left without another word. Thor didn't comfort her. He leaned his forehead against the windows on the other side of the room. Maggie tried to pull up her pants, but a sharp stab of pain stopped her. Her hands were shaking, and tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I couldn't stop him. His voice was strangely quiet. He continued to stare out the window. Maggie glared at him and pulled her shirt over her head. Her hair fell in her face, and she blew a loose strand away. You could have stopped him. You're bigger than he is, and stronger. You just let him control you. It's not that simple. It is. Thor sighed and shook his head. You don't understand. Maggie laughed bitterly. You're right about that, Thor. I really do not understand. She stood before him with her hands planted on her hips. She was unlike any woman he'd ever met. There was pain in her eyes, but she was fearless. Her defiance made him feel weak, and Thor hated feeling weak. He grabbed her arm, twisted it up behind her back, and pressed her against the wall. She laughed. She actually had the nerve to laugh at him. He put more pressure on her arm, but she just looked up at him with a bemused expression that made his blood boil. Do we have to do this now? Shut up. Don't forget who you're talking to. I know. You're Mr. Pratt's golden boy. What are you trying to prove? Be quiet and take off your pants. You like sloppy seconds? Shut up. He struck Maggie hard across the face. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Tears leaked from her eyes and her cheeks burned. Her lip was wet and tasted of blood. White, blinding rage was boiling up inside her, but she held still. Thor was angry. He pulled her hair so hard her head snapped back. He put his hand around her throat. Shut up, shut up, shut up, he was screaming. Shut up. Maggie gasped and clawed at her throat. Can't. Stop. His hand tightened. The world was going black around the edges, and she felt herself slipping away. Not like this. Hold on. I just want to die. She had never allowed herself to admit it before. Maggie was a fighter. She was a survivor. She had always believed that she would find a way out. It never occurred to her that she could fail, that she could die a miserable death and be shoved into an incinerator in a hallway of a derelict building and left to fill the halls with smoke. She never thought she would be forgotten. Nothing had been good since Casey died. Her family was gone. Everyone she had ever known was either a mindless client or missing. There was nothing left to protect. Maggie was losing control. Soon it would all fall apart. Soon, yes, but not yet. Hold on a little longer. Play along. Don't die. I wish you would hurry up. Thor's grip tightened. Just before she fell into darkness, Maggie felt it. A brief glimmer. It was happening again. Then everything went black. Maggie woke up a few hours later. She had missed lunch, but that was okay. She was barely given enough food to make it worth the effort of chewing. Skipping meals was always encouraged. Mr. Pratt would reward her for this. The rewards were often worse than the punishments. Thor was gone. The cheerful blonde receptionist didn't know where he had gone and informed her that she was scheduled to work with a new trainer, a petite girl named Kylie. Maggie's heart sank. Male trainers were easier to manipulate. This girl would have something to prove. The newbies always did. Everyone wanted to be the next Thor. Maggie's body ached, and she knew she was in for an excruciating workout. Kylie appeared at her side and noted something in a small black notebook. It looked just like the one Tessa had used to record Maggie's daily torture. But when Maggie blinked, the cover changed to a deep mossy green. Not the same notebook. Glitch. Kylie had gorgeous hair. It was long and curly and the color of copper. She wore it swept back into a long braid and held in place with a thin silver headband. Her skin was pale, which was odd. Trainers were always tan. It was in the SuperGym handbook. Tan equaled healthy. Perhaps Mr. Pratt's tastes were changing. Or maybe she was Thor's type. She had to be the chosen one, the newbie that Mr. Pratt left untouched. Maggie was surprised that she felt a little jealous of this pale, willowy beauty. Don't get caught up in the game. Focus. It can't happen here. Other Maggie was right. Her hands tingled. That only happened right before or right after an attack. Every time it ended in death, and she couldn't let that happen again. Not to this girl. She was young and naive. She wasn't evil. She was just brainwashed by the SuperGym cult, by Mr. Pratt and his ideal. And if it happens, Mr. Pratt will notice. He's already too close to the truth. What was the truth? Maggie wasn't sure of anything. It was something that happened, an uncontrollable power that made her do terrible things. Of course, it usually happened to people who were trying to harm her, so she kind of appreciated her strange affliction. At least she only hurt those who had hurt her. Trainers, dietitians, Mr. Pratt. Be patient. His time will come. Kylie cleared her throat. She looked nervous. Let's go. Over here, please. This girl is done. Mr. Pratt will not approve of this training style at all. Maggie felt sorry for the girl. She was not strong enough for her position. She was not trainer material. She was weak. Mr. Pratt would soon demote her, or kill her. It would depend on his mood. Kylie loaded up the barbell and stepped back. She smiled brightly and gestured to it. Let's get started. She wasn't mean, but she was relentless. Maggie endured hours of training without a break. Kylie was high energy, possibly even more energetic than Tessa. She bounced around the room, counting reps and laughing, while Maggie struggled through exercise after endless exercise. She would definitely keep Thor on his toes. Maggie felt another pang of jealousy. What's wrong with you? Thor is awful. Thor was awful. He was cruel and demeaning, and he was the enemy. He did have moments of kindness, but that just made her hate him more. He was weak. He did Mr. Pratt's bidding without question. He was everything Maggie despised, yet she didn't want him focused on anyone else. He belonged to her. The most powerful trainer in Famicili. The ideal. Thor spent every waking hour thinking of her. There is something wrong with you. Kylie blew 3 sharp blasts on her whistle. The workout was finally over. Maggie sprawled on the matted floor in a puddle of sweat. Her muscles twitched involuntarily. Everything hurt. Kylie consulted her little notebook and made a few notes before snapping it shut. That was okay. You're making progress. How do you feel? Maggie wasn't sure what to say. No one had ever asked her about her feelings. Feelings were something to deny, something to be crushed and hidden away. No one in Famicili cared about feelings. It's a trap. Kylie smiled. She was very pretty despite the freckles. I know it's a different approach, but you really are doing well. You must feel proud of your accomplishments. You look great. Kylie obviously needed to get her big violet eyes checked. Maggie did not look great. Her skin sagged in places where the fat used to be. Her breasts were shrinking into 2 wrinkled pendulums. Her ass had disappeared. She was vanishing. The incredible vanishing woman. Kylie's smile faltered at Maggie's continued silence. She knelt beside Maggie's prone body and brushed a sweaty lock of hair off her forehead. She turned Maggie's flushed face toward her and held it so she couldn't look away. "You can talk to me, Maggie. I know how it is around here. It's hard work. Attaining the ideal isn't easy. Trust me, I get it. But it doesn't have to be unpleasant. You can talk to me. We could be friends." Friends. The word didn't register at first. Maggie had almost forgotten its meaning. Definitely a trap. Women were not permitted to be friends in Famicili. Men were, but only if they followed a strict pecking order and limited their discussions to tits, sports, and how much they could bench. Play along. She obviously needs a friend. Maybe she'll be helpful later. Maggie attempted a smile, but it had been too long. She'd forgotten how. She managed to tighten the muscles in her cheeks, and Kylie accepted it. Her face lit up. She beamed at Maggie as she helped her sit up. Maggie took a deep breath and held it for a moment. She let it out and tried another smile. "I feel pretty good." "Tessa's program is working. It's incredible, really. I've seen your records. You were a troubling case." "How did you do it?" "What?" "Lose the weight." Kylie's smile wavered. She toyed nervously with the edge of the notebook. "I didn't. I've always looked like this." Maggie crossed her arms over her chest and scowled at Kylie. "Some friend. You're already lying to me. I thought I could trust you." "You can." "I don't want the scripted answer. I want the truth." Kylie looked around nervously. She lowered her voice. "Fine. Tessa trained me. She was brilliant. I lost the weight immediately. I was a fatty like you, a junkies addict. But now I'm a trainer, and it's incredible. Best decision of my life." There were tears in her eyes. What an actress. Look at those tears. Maggie shook her head. "Tessa told me about her best clients. I guess she thought it would motivate me or something. It's funny. She never mentioned you." Kylie's smile blinked off, then back on. "Oh, well, I never made much of an impression. I'm forgettable." This is just depressing. "You can't be that forgettable. You're a trainer." "Yes, that's true. I am." She's hiding something. Maggie was intrigued. She decided to keep Kylie close for now. She would play along and figure out what her new trainer was hiding. Maybe she can help us get over the wall. Maggie smiled at Kylie. She would find a way out of Famicili. She refused to die on this side of the wall. And that is the end of chapters 17 and 18 of SuperGym. I hope you're still enjoying it, and I will be back next week with another chapter. Until next time, keep reading.